What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back for another episode of Under the Radar. I am back to review there are only three albums that came out that I was interested in on the weekend of May 6th, 2022, and I'm here to briefly review those albums and give you my overall score and where does it rank among the albums of this year so far. Well, let's start with the first one. Really, kind of the biggest release that came out during the weekend, and kind of have a little personal investment in it, considering the lead singer is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, Chris Jericho. Yes, the first album we're going to talk about is the new one from Fozzy Boombox. So yeah, for those uneducated out there, Fozzy is a heavy metal hard rock band formed by Chris Jericho. That's right, that Chris Jericho from pro wrestling, WWE, WCW, ECW, AEW, wherever you've seen him in. He's a big name in the pro wrestling world, one of the biggest names in pro wrestling, and he's a metalhead and decided to form his own band with members from Stuck Mojo. And Fozzy, yeah, first two albums, pretty much cover albums of them covering other songs. It wasn't until their third album, All That Remains, where they pretty much became an original band writing original material and have been going strong ever since, and had been on labels like Century Media even, which is a pretty big deal for a band like this. So we had their first album, Happenstance, All That Remains, Chasing the Grails, Sins and Bones, Do You Want to Start a War, Judas, and now this. So this is their 8th studio album, 6th overall in terms of original material exclusively. Well, for the most part. There is one cover song on this album, but yeah, for this being their 8th studio album, and Jericho still sounding great as far as a singer, and there are moments on this album I hear where he's using some effects, like in the opening track. I understand why they went for the effect in the first verse on the first track to kind of give it like almost like as if he's giving out a speech kind of vibe, which is really cool. For the most part of this album, there are some catchy riffs and catchy hooks and fun choruses. But for me, my main gripes I had with this album is that the lyrics were a little dumb on a couple of tracks, especially the song Ugly on the Inside, where he's literally saying, UGLY, you ain't got no alibi. It's like, come on, Chris, you're better than that. But the other big issue that I had with this album is that I felt like when it came down to the production, this album was a little overproduced. Like, it's almost had like an electronic music influence on top with some of the beats and the ambience in the background while the riffs and the drums and everything's going on. It sounded a little overproduced for my taste. And then the other issue, like I brought up earlier, some of the lyrics were kind of dumb, but most of the music on here is energetic and fun. Like, if you're going into this album expecting like a real serious, like, technical masterpiece, you're not gonna get that. Fozzy's all about creating fun, catchy songs that you can remember. Case in point, their song Judas off their last album is still one of the catchiest songs I've heard in years. So, Fozzy knows how to write catchy stuff. This album, I feel like, in my opinion, in terms of all the Fozzy albums, this might be the weakest one, but it's still solid for what it is, which is why I give it a 7.5 out of 10. There are cool moments on this album, it's just, like I said, the production was too polished, and some of the lyrics were really dumb. So, but yeah, still I recommend you guys give this a listen, form your own opinions, check it out, Fozzy Boombox. Now let's get to the really damn good stuff. Kicking things off for this, the penultimate album I'm talking about for this episode, we are talking Every Day a Funeral by Rise to the Sky. Of course, this is the 4th studio album from this one-man atmospheric death doom project out of Chile, and it's by Sergio, and I forget his full name right off the top of my head, but he's been doing this band for quite a while, since 2018, 2019. This is the 4th studio album. I covered one of the 2 albums that came out last year in 2021, and I believe it made my top 30 list. in 2021 because it was just atmospheric and deep and dark and brooding. And with this album, Every Day a Funeral, that darkness and brood is just even further enhanced. Although here, as opposed to the last album that I checked out from 2021, where it was a little more aggressive, here this is much more melancholic. Like, it is sad, it is depressing. This is almost more or less, this is, I guess the best way for me to describe it, it's like, while this is atmospheric death doom, this album has lots of funeral doom on top of it. Like, the violins and such really kind of enhance the depressing nature that this album had to offer. It's very sorrowful and loaded with anguish and agony in terms of the atmosphere. And these slow, doomy riffs that you get are very powerful and impactful. Vocals, we're talking way low in the register. Low gutturals going on throughout, but very melodic on top of that. Like, kind of, if I were to put it at its simplest, this album sounds like if Swallow the Sun became a funeral doom band. That's kind of, well, I mean, this is basically kind of, well, then again, Swallow the Sun did that on disc 3 of Songs from the North, but you get where I'm coming from. Especially if you listen to this album, you'll definitely get some of that sorrowful atmosphere that you get from Swallow the Sun, but with a more bleak and more darker approach. And for those reasons, I give this album a 9 out of 10. This is another fantastic album from this guy. I mean, Sergio really coming into his own in terms of creating some atmospheric, meaningful, extreme music in his own way. I definitely recommend you guys check it out. And that brings us to the third and final album for this episode, and that's Demonicals, Mass Destroyer. So this album kind of caught onto my radar thanks to Thralls of Metal doing a review for it. And I thought, alright, well, if Thralls is checking it out, I might as well check it out. And boy, I was not expecting how good this one is. This is, of course, a Swedish death metal band, and you're thinking, okay, it's Swedish death metal, but what kind? Is it going to be that blackened death metal from, like, Necrophobic or bands along those lines? Is it going to be the Gothenburg melodic death metal style? Or is this going to be Boss HM2 Stockholm-inspired death metal? I would say this album is about 80% Boss HM2 Stockholm death metal with 20% Gothenburg melodic death metal, because there are some great melodies on this album, but it's not really the focal point of the album like in most melodic death metal bands. This is still just straight up old school Swedish death metal with moments of that Gothenburg stuff on top. Mostly like Hypocrisy and At the Gates, like the early Gothenburg stuff. You do get hints of that, but by and large, this is very much like another version of Dismember out there, because this album is so similar to the first couple of Dismember albums, especially in the tuning. Like, they're in C tuning as opposed to B, which is the standard for Swedish death metal guitar sounds. Here, it's like they decide to take the best parts of like Hypocrisy, At the Gates, Entombed, and Dismember, and kind of mash it all together, and that's how you get Mass Destroyer. Some brutal riffs. There's even lots of killer groove on this album. Like, it's not all about blazing speed all the time. They break it up with groove and even some of that classic D-beat and maybe even a tiny little hint of doom at times where they slow things way down briefly, but it's there. Overall, I loved how quick this album was. It's just short, sweet, to the point. Doesn't mess around. I give this one a 9 out of 10 as well. This is fucking awesome Swedish death metal. Like I said, at a ratio, it's like 80% classic Stockholm HM2 death metal, 20% that melodic death metal style, because, like I said, the melodies on here definitely harken back to Hypocrisy and At the Gates. But by and large, This is old school death metal with a little bit of that sensibility on top. But what did you guys think of all three of these albums? Let me know in the comments section below. And until next time, horns high. See you soon.
I've noticed that once people hit Slayer, they're like, is there something more extreme than Slayer?
Yeah, it's the crossroad, you know. Either you're going like, okay, this is too much, or you're like, I need more. Yeah, so I found Cannibal Corpse on YouTube when I was 12 or 13, and heard the Hammer Smash Face bass solo.
Of course.
Of course, already then I was a bass player, but when I heard that, I was like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. This is it. And then it just spiraled downwards from there.
And it just keeps growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, it never stops. It devours you.
Yeah, because